Why is it that when those who once slaughtered pigs are dying, they often struggle to draw their final breath? My uncle, who had spent his life dealing with the dead, once said, it was because, in their youth, they killed too many pigs, carrying with them a weight of resentment, and so, before death, they were forced to endure the pain of the pigs they had once slaughtered. This was the first time I had seen someone at the brink of their final breath. The thick funeral clothes made the old man's head look small, yet clearly the family had not realized that he still held on to a faint breath, and so they had called my uncle early to prepare the funeral rites. When my uncle saw that the old man was tormented, unable to leave this world, he quickly told the family to fetch a basin of water and a pig slaughtering knife. None of them understood his intention. They had seen other Taoist priests perform rituals before, but never had they seen one that required water and a butcher's knife. Suspicion filled the air. My uncle then called the family closer and told them to lift the old man's eyelids, to see if his pupils had dilated. They did as he said, but what they found horrified them. Not only had the pupils not dilated, the old man's body was still faintly warm, and though his breath was thin as a thread, it was still there. If not for my uncle's instruction to test with a dampened fingertip, they might never have realized that he was still alive. At this discovery, panic spread through the Vibang family. They hurried to fetch the basin and the knife, just as my uncle had asked. But before they could leave the room, the old man lying on the bed suddenly twitched. His limbs trembled, his muscles stiffened, and his mouth opened wide, like a pig, pinned down on the slaughter bench. Seeing this, my uncle shouted to the family, "Hold him down." He himself rushed to the old man's side. 2 or 3 of the old man's sons reacted quickly, grabbing his legs and shoulders, yet to their shock, the frail, malnourished elder suddenly displayed a strength beyond reason, breaking free from their grip several times. "Do not resist." "Old Vibang," my uncle said firmly, "it is I, Turn, here to help you. You no longer need to endure the stabbing pain of the knife. Those restraining you are not the emissaries of the underworld, they are your own children. If you struggle too hard, you may end up hurting them." As he spoke, my uncle pulled out a talisman, pressing it onto the bed and softly chanting. Strangely, as soon as the paper touched the bed, the old man calmed. Though his face continued to twitch uncontrollably, his features twisting as though from unbearable agony. The sight terrified me. It was the first time I had seen a dying man burst forth with such unnatural strength. But then my attention was drawn to the talisman. It had begun to burn the moment it was placed down, and I realized that when it was fully consumed, the old man might enter another violent struggle. "Hurry," my uncle cried. "Fetch the knife and the basin of water. If not, your father will not be able to depart in peace." The moment the old man grew calm, my uncle turned and shouted to Vibang Hai Sinch, startled. Hai Sinch nodded quickly and ran out of the room. The talisman continued to burn. My uncle's brow furrowed deeper and deeper. The room fell into silence, the rest of the Vibang family paralyzed with fear, their faces pale as death. 5 minutes later, the talisman burned to ash. From the old man's throat came a groan of pain, a sound broken, choked, as though something blocked his airway. Then, suddenly, his body convulsed as if struck by lightning, his pale face jerking uncontrollably, though this time, it seemed, he was forcing himself not to thrash wildly. Seeing this, my uncle rushed out, shouting for Hai Sinch to hurry. At last, 3 minutes later, Hai Sinch returned, left hand carrying a basin of water, right hand gripping a black iron butcher's knife. Though long unused, the knife was still sharp, its blade gleaming darkly under the lamplight. "Here, here," Hai Sinch called, "the knife and the basin. What do we do now, Uncle Turn?" My uncle glanced at him calmly, then spoke in a steady voice, "Kill your father." The words struck Hai Sinch like a thunderclap. His whole body shuddered, the basin and knife clattering to the ground. He gasped for breath, his voice trembling. "Uncle, what did you just say?" My uncle's tone did not waver. "I said, kill your father, but killing is a crime, and he is my own flesh and blood." Hai Sinch stammered, pale and broken. "Who told you to kill another man?" My uncle said coldly, "I told you to kill your father. Forget it, I will do it myself." He bent down, picked up the basin and the knife, and stepped slowly towards the bed. With every step closer, the old man's thrashing grew more violent, until he even struck the bed frame with a loud thud. His children could no longer restrain him. My uncle raised his voice, chanting loudly, "Dust to dust, earth to earth, all karmic debts of the wheel of rebirth are ended." As he chanted, he thrust the basin beneath the bed with a heavy thud, and then threw the butcher's knife into it, the blade landing with a metallic clang. Straightening his back, he shouted, "Old Vibong, it is time to depart." At those words, the old man, who had been writhing in agony, suddenly grew still. From his throat came a single gulping sound, as if he was swallowing something deep inside, and then his breath faded away forever. The Vibong family, seeing him pass so peacefully, all sighed with relief. But on my uncle's face, the look only grew darker, heavier, as though what he had witnessed was far from over. Asterisk's grandfather clearly showed that the matter of the old man was not as simple as the Vuong family believed. Although I was only 8 years old, I was already more intelligent than most children of my age, and seeing the tense expression on my grandfather's face, I could not help but feel uneasy. Before I could ask the reason, he had already summoned the Vuong family to gather close, all children and grandchildren who were filial. "Come here, shave the head and beard of old Tran, then wash him clean. Remember, do not use water that is too hot or too cold. Warm water is best. You may speak to him, but you must not cry." Grandfather held his pipe, waving his hand to order everyone in the house. The dead must have their hair and beard shaved, for according to Chinese belief, hair and beard symbolize the troubles and sorrows of this world, and so they must be shaved away to cut off worldly suffering. Warm water was used because when someone has just died, the nerves of the body have not yet completely ceased. They still feel, and water that is too hot or too cold will cause them discomfort. He forbade crying because the brain of the dead has not yet fully stopped functioning. They can still hear, and if the family cries, the soul may not want to leave the body. Everyone in the Vuong family obeyed. Though tears streamed down their faces, none of them dared to weep aloud. Vuong Hai Sinch wiped his father's body with a damp cloth, whispering words to him while the women busied themselves, some shaving his beard, some cutting his hair. Everything was carried out in order under my grandfather's arrangement. About half an hour later, once the new funeral clothes had been put on the old man, the preparations were complete. Seeing this, grandfather asked Vuong Hai Sinch about the exact date and hour of birth, for he needed it to calculate the proper day for burial. If the chosen day clashed with the fate of the deceased, not only would the family know no peace, even the priest presiding over the burial could suffer misfortune. Hearing this, Vuong Hai Sinch hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly recited his father's birth details, year of Hin Mao, The 3rd day of the 8th lunar month, born at the hour of th. And are you certain? Grandfather asked again, staring carefully at the body. For this matter was most important and required caution. Sinch's lips moved as though he wanted to say something more, but in the end he clenched his teeth and nodded with a hoarse sound of assent. Sadly, Grandfather was too focused on examining the body to notice the subtle change in Sinch's expression. Only I, the youngest in the room, caught that uneasy shift, taking Sin's confirmation. Grandfather made his calculations, then decided that the funeral and burial would be held on the 4th day. Thus the body lay in the courtyard for 3 days, and on the 4th, the funeral procession began as planned. The procession was long, stretching for more than 100 paces. Drums and horns shook the air, firecrackers boomed, papermen, paper, horses, and wreaths stretched so far that the end could not be seen. But just as the procession left the village and entered the fields, a terrible accident occurred, one no one could have foreseen. The coffin suddenly became unbearably heavy. Normally 5 men could carry it with ease, but this time, even with more men lifting, the weight seemed impossible. By theory, the coffin and corpse together weighed no more than 300 jin, not too much, yet I clearly saw the carrying pole bend more and more under the strain. The pole, a great log placed across the coffin, was strong enough to bear 700 or 800 jin. Yet before our eyes it bent and snapped in two. The sharp crack rang out, and the broken wood fell onto the coffin lid, piercing a hole no larger than a thumb. The bearers stumbled and fell to the ground. The black coffin dropped heavily with a dreadful thud, a sound that struck the hearts of the mourners like a giant hammer, sending shivers through all. Sinch, the son of the deceased, was stunned. His legs gave way and he sank to the ground, dazed. For in a funeral, a coffin falling to the earth was a dire omen. It was said that if the coffin of a good man fell, it was because he could not bear to depart. If the coffin of a wicked man fell, it was because he could not accept death. In such a case, his spirit might turn into a restless ghost, bringing harm to both his family and those who walked in the procession. Although old Vuong had never committed great sins, he had slaughtered pigs his entire life, and the karmic burden of killing was too heavy. Thus his coffin was regarded as the coffin of a wicked man. Fear gripped the crowd, their eyes fixed on the fallen coffin, their legs trembling. One of the bearers, voice shaking, cried out, "It is over, it is over, the coffin has fallen, we shall be cursed by old Vuong." Though the mourners panicked, Grandfather remained calm. In his eyes too was a trace of disbelief, yet his expression barely changed. "What is there to fear?" he said coldly. "It is nothing more than a coffin fallen to the ground. You tremble as if the sky had collapsed. A coffin that falls is simply unwilling to leave the soil of its homeland. Old Vuong cannot part with the land of our village. But I have a way." He stepped to the front of the coffin, crouched beneath its base, and scraped up a handful of yellow earth. Raising it high, he struck it hard against the coffin lid. In a stern voice he said, "I advise you to depart peacefully, to return to the underworld where all things end. In life, all was like drifting clouds. Why cling to this land and suffer more?" With that, Grandfather turned and lit 3 sticks of incense, but he did not place them before the coffin. Instead, he held them towards the road of yellow earth beneath our feet. Then he handed the incense to me to how. "Hold these tightly," he said. "When the incense burns out, call me at once." I grasped the incense firmly, not daring to be careless, for this was not the first time I had held incense. These were incense sticks grandfather used to test the path, for when a priest was uncertain of good or ill omens in a ritual. This was the way to seek guidance, or the safety of the path ahead. They would burn 3 incense sticks to ask heaven and earth. If the incense burned down normally, then there would be no problem, everything would go smoothly. But if the incense went out halfway, and all 3 sticks failed to burn fully, that was a sign of great misfortune, and the ritual master had to be extremely cautious. Seeing that the boy was clutching the incense tightly, his grandfather turned back and called out to the funeral procession, "Lift the coffin, move on." Before long, the procession continued forward, but their pace was as slow as a crawling turtle, inching toward the graveyard to the sound of drums, firecrackers, and horns. The boy stared fixedly at the incense in his hand, but not long after, something happened that left him stunned. The incense, which had been burning steadily at first, suddenly went out completely in just 2 minutes. The guiding incense had extinguished almost as soon as it was lit this time. His grandfather would surely not be able to escape disaster. A terrifying thought struck the boy. He immediately ran to his grandfather, waving the extinguished sticks, and shouting, "The incense is out." As soon as the words left his mouth, his grandfather froze, turned back, and took the sticks from his hand. He examined them carefully, even touching the charred tips of the last one, before letting out a helpless sigh. "This funeral, I fear something terrible will happen." His grandfather's brows furrowed, his voice now more grave than ever. He paused for a moment, then spoke firmly. "The procession has already begun. We cannot turn back. We can only face what comes, step by step." With that, he took a rusty ritual sword from his pack, his eyes locked on the road ahead as if expecting danger at any moment. But when the coffin reached the eastern mountain of the village, the funeral rooster tied to the front of the coffin suddenly crowed and flapped its wings before flying off. The accident shocked everyone. The entire procession panicked, scrambling after the bird. The grandfather, however, was stunned. Never in his decades of leading funerals had he seen a consecrated rooster break free. That bird had been blessed. It should not have moved a single step for the entire journey. Yet here it was, flying away before their very eyes. In the chaos, his grandfather bellowed, "Catch it!" At the same time, he slapped a talisman onto the body of Vibongji Lam inside the coffin and then stood guard over it. Instantly, hundreds of people rushed to catch the rooster. Luckily, it was soon captured and returned to him. He held the bird in his hands and sighed heavily. This funeral, something is terribly wrong, but where lies the problem? Still, he ordered the procession to move forward. This time, he walked beside the coffin at all times, vigilant for any mishap. Fortunately, nothing else went wrong, and Vibongji Lam was safely carried to the mountain. Under the grandfather's direction, the coffin was lowered neatly into the grave. After the Vibong family opened the coffin one last time to see the deceased, the burial proceeded as usual. His grandfather lifted the HN Fana. Ritual Solbanar encircled the grave to guide the spirit of the dead toward peace. But then, something no one expected happened. The soul banner suddenly caught fire. There had been no flame nearby, yet the whole cloth burst into flames, burning furiously. Within moments, it was reduced to ashes, leaving only the bamboo pole in his grandfather's hand. Everyone present gasped in shock. Though most of them were not ritual masters, they had all attended funerals before, but never in all their lives had they seen a soul banner ignite on its own. Suddenly, The grandfather seemed to realize something. He turned toward Hyacinth, who was dressed in mourning clothes, and asked angrily, "This isn't right. Hyacinth, when exactly was your father born?" His question made Hyacinth's face tighten. He seemed to realize something too. In folk belief, when a soul banner burns by itself, it means the recorded birth date of the deceased does not match their true fate, making the burial site clash with their destiny. This was a terrible omen, a great misfortune. With a heavy sigh, Hyacinth stammered, I don't know for sure. I only know what's written on his ID card." Upon hearing this, the grandfather slammed the bamboo pole down in fury. He then lit 3 new incense sticks and began chanting and performing a ritual. It lasted more than 40 minutes before he finally dismissed everyone and allowed them to leave. By the time they returned home, it was already dark. The first thing his grandfather did was shut all the doors. Then he told the boy to climb into the coffin he had long ago prepared for himself. With deadly seriousness, he warned, "No matter what you hear tonight, do not come out. Do not make a sound." Although the boy was puzzled, he obeyed. He knew his grandfather would never harm him in the dead of night. He heard the howling of the wind and the knocking at the door. He also heard someone calling his grandfather's name. The more he listened, the more familiar the voice became. It sounded exactly like Fibongji Lam, the man who had just been buried that very day. The calling went on until the rooster crowed at dawn, fading only then. At the same time, the boy could hear his grandfather's voice, loud, as if in a heated argument with someone. When morning came, trembling, the boy climbed out of the coffin only to be struck with a horrifying sight. A rope hung from the ceiling beam. One end was looped tightly around his grandfather's neck. The other end was tied to the very coffin the boy had been lying inside. His grandfather's body hung suspended above him. He had taken his own life. The death was brutal, sudden, and unthinkable. The boy had always regarded his grandfather as a superhuman figure, someone beyond the reach of ordinary fate. Yet here he was dead, claimed by the very rituals he had mastered all his life, slain by the spirit of the man he had buried. For the boy had heard it clearly the night before. The voice outside calling his grandfather was none other than that of Fibongji Lam. News of the grandfather's death spread through the village that very morning like wildfire. The entire place erupted into chaos, dogs barking, chickens scattering. Neighboring villagers also heard the news, for after all, this man had been the one who exorcised spirits, saved lives, and dissolved misfortunes for decades. Over the years, there were countless people who had received his help. However, the first person to arrive at your house was not someone your grandfather had saved, nor was it his wife or children. Was Hyacinth, the man who had come to invite your grandfather the day before. The moment he stepped inside, he fell to his knees before your grandfather's hanging body. He slapped his own face repeatedly, crying bitterly, endlessly begging your grandfather for forgiveness. At that time, you were only 8 years old, standing silently by your grandfather's corpse, quietly observing Hyacinth as he wept and apologized. Yet inside, you felt no ripple of emotion. Not because you were heartless, but because from a young age your grandfather had taught you life and death, as well as human suffering, are dictated by fate. Your father's words had surely angered the Wong family. After all, Wong Darlin had only been buried by your uncle yesterday. The body had barely settled in the earth, and now it was to be dug up again. If word of this spread, would it not ruin the reputation of the Wang family. Yet your father did not care about that. He simply turned to face the Wang family and spoke in a tone that allowed no refusal. If you do not dig it up now, it will be too late later. There will be no chance, and Long, do not be so hasty. We are not refusing to cooperate, but disturbing a grave is no small matter. If handled carelessly, it will destroy the feng shui of the Wang household. Explain clearly why this must be done, for we truly dare not act without reason. Sensing that your father was growing impatient, Wang Heisheng hurried to speak, fearful that your father might lose his temper and refuse to help the family overcome their looming misfortune. The others in the Wang family quickly joined in, saying, "That is right, Njoke Long. You arrived without saying a word, and the first thing you demanded was for us to dig up the grave. But this is the grave of our own kin. If anything happens afterwards, would we not be condemned as descendants of the Wang line?" At this point, the Wang relatives began pressing for an explanation. They were not enraged by your father's words, but merely sought the reason behind such a drastic act. It was understandable. In the countryside, even the smallest scandal could spread across 10 miles. To speak of digging up an ancestor's grave was no light matter, seeing that all were demanding a reason. Your father finally began to explain. Your father was not born in the year of the rabbit, and yet his funeral was held on the day of Hong. Sure, once such a beginning is made, the entire family must bear the consequence. Had he been buried in an ordinary spot, it would have been manageable. At worst, within 3 days, there would be death in the household. But my father chose for him a site of remarkable feng shui. This place rests against the mountain, faces the river, gathers both wind and water. It is a site where fortune converges. The waters here flow gently, ensuring the energy does not disperse. To the left stands the azure dragon, to the right the white tiger, both with strong forms. Under ordinary circumstances, this would indeed be an auspicious resting place. However, to bury your father on such a site on the Hongshore day has created the opposite effect. The fortune that should have gathered slowly has now become killing energy. The dragon and tiger that once protected have turned hostile. The harmony of wind and water has intensified the baleful force, hastening the downfall of the Wang family. If the grave is not opened at once, and if the resentment clinging to your father's body is not dispersed, then with the killing energy accumulating here, I fear that by tonight, someone in your household will die suddenly. I will say no more. Believe me or not, act or not, it is your decision. Hearing this, Wang Heisheng froze. His legs gave way, and he stumbled backwards a few steps. When he regained his senses, he seized a hoe from the ground and dashed to his father's grave. With all his strength, he began hacking at the earth above the tomb. Seeing him take the lead, the rest of the Wang family no longer stood idle. All of them joined in, wielding hoes with desperate urgency. 7 or 8 men struck the ground in unison, steadily breaking apart the mound of earth. Your father stood to one side, cigarette between his lips, directing Wang Dehai and the others as they worked. After nearly an hour, the mound was flattened. In the center, a large pit had been dug, and a foul odor began to seep out into the air. The smell was revolting, like rotting pork mixed with manure, with a trace of iron and the stench of blood. It was the first time in your life that you had ever smelt something so grotesque. From that day on, you understood that the dead could emit such an unbearable stench. "We must be close to the coffin," your father said, staring intently into the pit. "Careful now, Do not damage the coffin. Do not let your tools strike it. Not long after, a heavy sound echoed through the air. Every gaze snapped towards the pit. There, beneath the broken earth, a black coffin board emerged. Its once smooth surface now bore a dent where a hoe had struck it as the coffin was exposed. The stench of decay surged up violently, thick enough to make the stomach heave. Your father covered his mouth and nose, peering carefully at the coffin lid. Then he shouted, "Keep digging. Dig around it. The whole coffin must be uncovered. Dig more. Must we really?" Wang Heishang looked distressed. After all, the one within was his own father. A younger man from the Wang family spat on the ground and scoffed. "Did you not hear Enjoklong's warning? If you do not dig, someone in your house will die. Listen to him. Get that coffin out." Heisheng hesitated, tears welling in his eyes. Finally, he wiped his face with his sleeve, knelt before the coffin, and cried aloud, "Father, forgive me. Today I am unfilial. For the safety of the Wang family, I must disturb your rest." He kowtowed several times, striking his head against the earth, then rose, gripped the hoe once more, and began digging around the coffin board. The others followed his lead, raising their tools high and striking the soil with force. Half an hour later, the coffin lay fully exposed. The soil around it had been cleared away. "Enjoklong, we have finished," Wang Heisheng said, his voice choked with emotion. "What must we do now?" But your father did not answer. He only lit another cigarette, drawing deeply as if to drive away the odor rising from the coffin. After several puffs, he stepped forward, his expression grave. Circling the coffin slowly, he produced a stick of incense, lit it, and placed it between the cracks of the coffin board. Under the suspicious gaze of the Wang family, your father suddenly shouted, "Open the coffin." "What? Open the coffin?" Wang Heisheng collapsed onto the coffin lid in terror. The others gasped, each drawing in a sharp breath. The air was heavy with the stench of decay. No one had expected that your father would not only demand the grave be opened, but that the coffin itself should also be unsealed. Digging up a grave was already a great taboo. To force open a coffin went beyond that. It meant the descendants of the Wang family themselves would be the ones to disturb their ancestors' rest, if such a thing were to spread. The entire countryside within 10 miles would take the Wang family as a cautionary tale. Wang Heisheng did not wish to bear such disgrace, nor did anyone else among the Wang clan, for they all had to live on in the village, where ridicule was long-lasting. Yet when they saw the serious look on your father's face, the utter absence of jest, none dared to refuse outright. In the end, they merely glanced at one another in silence. No one spoke against him, but no one dared to carry out his order either. The cigarette in your father's hand burned halfway down. Still, no one moved, no one spoke. Finally, he flung the half-smoked stub to the ground, seized a hoe, and strode swiftly towards the dark red coffin. Startled, Wang Heisheng rushed forward and grabbed your father's arm. "Enjoklong, what are you doing? Calm yourself, calm yourself." It was plain to all what your father intended. Yet Heisheng still forced the question, as though denial might change the truth. Your father glared at them all and shouted, "If you will not bear the blame of unfilial descendants, then let me, Trand Enjoklong, open the coffin for you. Mark my words, if the coffin is not opened today, even the gods themselves will not save the Wang family." With that, he shoved Heisheng aside, raised the hoe high, and struck the coffin lid with brutal force. A heavy thud resounded, and the whole coffin shook. When he raised the hoe a second time, the board already bore a deep dent. But before he could strike again, He Shang threw himself forward, clutching the handle. "No, Enjo Klong, you must not. You cannot strike the coffin again. If you break it open, our family will be shamed in the town forever." He clung to the tool with trembling hands, his voice frantic. At these words, your father's brow darkened. His tone grew harsh, edged with anger. "So, is it the lives of your family that matter, or some hollow notion of reputation? Which is more precious?" To him, the answer was plain. Life mattered more than pride. Why else would he, an outsider, take the lead in opening the grave, unafraid of condemnation? Yet the Wong family, the very ones in danger, faltered in cowardice. His anger was understandable. "Of course, the lives of my family matter," He Sheng said, "but you cannot simply demand the coffin be broken. If there is a flaw in the coffin, we can repair it. If it is too short, we can lengthen it. If too narrow, we can widen it. So long as we do not disturb my father's body, I will follow your advice." He shook his head again and again, still unwilling to allow your father to open the coffin. Lacking the courage to risk the stain of UNFI LIALITY, your father grew more furious still. "The coffin, you think the coffin is at fault. This coffin was made by the Shao family craftsmen in town. Its quality is beyond reproach. How else could it have withstood all the disturbances already? The problem is not the coffin, it is the body within." He slammed the hoe down, pointing sharply at the coffin, his voice like a rebuke. The composure of a ritual master was gone. Swept aside by urgency, He Sheng frowned, suspicion in his eyes. "My father's body? What of my father's body?" Your father said, his voice heavy, was buried in a place of perilous feng shui. This land magnifies killing energy. His body must be raised, so that the bond between him and this ground can be broken. If not, the Wong family will suffer disaster without end. He Sheng's face hardened, doubt creeping into his mind. He was no fool. He believed in ritual, yes, but he was not blindly superstitious. A thought stirred within joke, long merely trying to frighten him. Seeing his hesitation, your father's temper snapped. He seized Hasing by the collar, dragging him close to the black coffin. With a finger stabbing at the wood, he barked, "Tell me, in all your years, have you ever seen a corpse attacked by snakes and vermin during the funeral rites?" He shook his head. "Have you ever seen a funeral cart overturn halfway to the grave?" Again, He Sheng shook his head. "Have you ever seen a ritual master hang himself the very night after the burial?" He Sheng shook his head once more. "Only then." "Did your father release him?" His voice dropped, cold and stern. "All these things happened. They happened because you gave the wrong birth hour for your father. His karmic debts of slaughter were never repaid, and you held the funeral on a day of conflict. So, the moment he was buried, his body became a cursed corpse. A cursed corpse in such feng shui does not draw fortune, nor life, nor blessing. It feeds only killing energy and death. Do you not see? Has any corpse you know rotted and stunk within a single day of burial? Even in the heat of summer, a body sealed in its coffin takes a week or more to reek. But your father's stench filled the air after only one night. Is that not strange? The cursed energy here, nourished by this ground, is hastening the decay of the corpse, and as the corpse rots, so too will your family's fate. At best, you will know sickness and injury. At worst, calamity will strike until all are dead. Believe me or do not, the choice is yours." With those words, your father turned his back on the coffin. Slowly, he walked towards you, resting a hand gently on your head. His gaze lingered on Wang Heisheng, heavy and unyielding. The Wang family were silent, chilled to the bone by his words. Heisheng most of all. His face had gone ashen. He opened his mouth several times, but no words came forth. Time dragged by. 10 long minutes passed in suffocating silence. Then at last, Heisheng clenched his jaw and said in a low, resolute voice, "Very well. I accept your word. Open the coffin. Open it at once." Not wanting the Wang family to bear the infamy of unfilial conduct, Wang Heisheng declared firmly, "I will shoulder this burden." With that, he waved his hand, summoning the Wang family members. He was the first to seize the iron hoe and strike at the coffin lid. Seeing him begin, the other relatives of the Wang family no longer hesitated, one after another. They took up hoes and crowbars, hacking away in a frenzy. The dull thuds of iron striking the coffin planks echoed continuously. You watched every movement intently. Having lived with your grandfather as a child, you had often witnessed burials, yet this was the very first time you had seen a coffin being prized open. Driven by curiosity, you did not dare blink, fearful of missing anything. 7 or 8 men, armed with hoes, steel rods, and other tools, worked far faster than your father alone. Before long, half of the coffin's 13-centimeter thick lid had been hacked away, leaving only about 4 or 5 centimeters, just as you thought. Success was within reach. A horrified cry rang out from among the Wang relatives. "Kualong, come here quickly. What is this? Where did this pattern come from?" Ngo Klong, are all coffins from the Shao family's workshop carved with such things. Sensing their strange reaction, your father pulled you forward. Soon, the thing that had halted everyone's hands came into view. It was a dark, inky black mark, starkly different from the coffin's pale, dry yellow wood. The shape resembled the silhouette of a drenched figure, as though someone had daubed a human shadow onto the lid using filthy water. The outline bore a head, torso, and limbs, but was grotesquely distorted, like a child's clumsy scribble, as your father frowned, trying to discern what it might be. A Wang relative bent down and stretched out his hand to touch the dark shape. "Careful. Don't touch it." Your father shouted sharply, reacting at once, but he was a step too late. Just as he spoke, the man's fingers brushed the black figure on the coffin lid. At once, the atmosphere froze. Everyone seemed spellbound, eyes locked. On the man who was bent over, he did not move, like a wooden statue. "Are you all right?" Wang Heisheng asked tentatively. The man gave no answer. He remained crouched, back to the crowd, utterly still. The scene was unnerving. Just as your father made to step forward and check, something terrifying occurred. The man suddenly snapped his head around with a violent twist. His eyes bulged, his face contorted, the muscles rigid, and his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. But this was no grin of the living, it was sinister, mocking, almost like the grin of a carved grotesque mask. Worse still, his head had rotated a full 360 degrees. His body remained facing forward, unmoving, while his face stared back at you all. The sight drained the color from everyone's faces. And you, a child of only 8, were so petrified you burst into tears on the spot. A chilling cold seeped into your bones. Terror gripped your chest like iron. The courtyard fell into a deathly silence. Apart from the sound of heavy breathing, there was no noise at all. Shui Shusen, what's wrong with you? Wang Heisheng stammered, his voice trembling. But the man gave no replyingly, that grotesque grin, staring straight at Wang Heisheng. The smile twisted into a sneer, dripping with scorn, as though mocking him. Seeing this, your father shouted with certainty, "He's possessed." Everyone stepped back. At once, he thrust his hand into his pocket. The words "possessed by a spirit" sent shockwaves through the Wang clan. Faces drained of blood, they stumbled back instinctively, fear written plain across them. Meanwhile, your father pulled out a talisman, holding it in his left hand, while his right hand formed the shape of a sword. He advanced towards the possessed man without hesitation. "Evil spirit, how dare you possess this man before me?" he bellowed. The possessed one gave no answer, only a low, eerie chuckle that clearly did not belong to his youthful voice. "Get out of his body, or I shall show no mercy." Your father thundered, raising the talisman. But before he could strike, the man shrieked and hurled himself at your father in a frenzy. Your father stamped his foot, gathering strength, then flung a thunder talisman high into the air. At once, golden sparks flared, the force of lightning burst forth. A silver bolt shot down like a serpent of light, striking the possessed man squarely. A deafening crack rang in your ears. The man was hurled backwards, crashing hard against the coffin lid. His twisted head slowly rotated back to its proper position. You, as a child, saw it all clearly, the flash of lightning, the strike, but the adults did not. To them, it seemed only that the man had been knocked flying. Yet even so, the sight left them aghast. From the man's crown, you saw a plume of black vapor rise, twisting into the shape of a vast, hideous face above the coffin, before dispersing into the night wind. His body convulsed violently, then finally slumped into unconsciousness. The Wang family were dumbstruck, staring wide-eyed and slack-jawed. "Quick, lift him up," your father barked. After possession, his body is tainted with yin energy. If not dealt with properly, he will surely fall gravely ill. Hearing this, the Wangs rushed to support their fallen kin. "Engo Glong, what should we do now? Isn't yin energy inside the body difficult to cure?" Wang Heisheng asked anxiously. Your father did not answer directly. Instead, he pulled out a packet of red cinnabar powder, dabbed some onto the man's forehead, and traced a third eye like that of the god Erlang. Only then did he speak calmly. "We return to the village and discuss further, but this coffin must still be opened, otherwise the Wang family truly will face death." Wang Heisheng laid the unconscious man aside, then took up a hoe once more, signaling the others to continue. But your father halted them sharply. "Wait, the coffin has already drawn in malevolent kiets. Yin energy has reached a dangerous peak. If you open it now, the evil vapors will pour out and harm the living. That would be perilous." He then produced several long nails from his pouch. These nails are forged from green copper struck by lightning. They are potent against spirits and will suppress the evil energy inside the coffin. Hammer them in, and it will be safe to proceed. The nails were distributed, and under your father's watchful eye, the family began driving them into the coffin lid with stones. The first nail sank in, and at once a plume of foul black smoke hissed out, the stench so revolting it made you gag. The second nail was struck home, and a chilling scream echoed from within, like a living person pierced through. The sound froze the marrow. The third nail went in and the coffin shook violently, as though something inside writhed in agony. The coffin continued to quake with each strike, until at last the seventh nail was hammered home. Only then did the phenomena cease. The coffin, under this strange suppression, finally split apart, but the moment it broke open, the stench that gushed out was unbearable. Everyone covered their noses, retching as the foul air flooded the yard. When they could bear to breathe again, all eyes turned to peer inside, and the sight that awaited them made every soul present shudder to the bone.